Okay, so Tracie, let's start with you, please.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm gonna try to get these glasses adjusted at some point. We're probably gonna have to resort to a rubber band. I'm happy to be here. I have this way of speaking that sometimes gets me in trouble, and so I decided to write everything so I wouldn't go off script and say something that would harm me later. I just actually typed it all in here. So, experiments can't fail, right? Why New Orleans public school children, why New Orleans will need rescue from post-Katrina recovery school district. Well, not recovery school district, post-Katrina public education reform. That's the title of my talk. And I'll tell you why I changed all of those words later on. I want to visit with you about my understanding of the promise of public education. I'm the product of educators. In my family, my father, my mother, my maternal grandfather, 3 aunts, 2 first cousins, 1 cousin-in-law, were all educators. Either in K-12 or on a college level, and I'm entering my 3rd year on faculty at Dillard University. I get educators in the work we are inspired to do. Prior to Hurricane Katrina, what a lot of people don't know is I practiced on the employee side of labor and employment law, and my docket was 75% educators, and I sued the school district a lot. And I won. I've written this presentation several times, but here's what I need you to know up front. New Orleans education reform had little to do with educating 90% of African American student population in New Orleans public schools. Let's just get that out of the way right now. All right. What I want to talk with you about this afternoon briefly is what New Orleans public education looked like then, by the numbers prior to Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and our numbers 10 years later. Then we'll get down to the real truths. So New Orleans public schools as of August 28th, 2005. The Orleans Parish School Board operated 128 schools. The students were poor. They were poor children in one of the poorest cities in one of the poorest states in this country. The school system had been consistently underfunded, and the infrastructure was just crumbling. It was just sad. Yet this school district was charged with educating these children, and the city's 65% African American, where there was white flight since I was a kid. At 25%, the city of New Orleans had one of the highest rates of private school attendance in the country. You know, when I left New Orleans, I didn't realize people didn't go to private school. I didn't know, like, don't y'all all go to private school? They're like, no, we pay taxes. Okay, so prior to the storm, New Orleans had been led by 10 superintendents in 10 years. Think about that, 10 superintendents in 10 years. Many of them left under controversy involving the mishandling of funds. I deposed 2 of them. That was really good. So prior to Katrina, there wasn't any real political will, particularly from our Confederate gentry, to reform New Orleans public schools. Yeah, I said it. There we go. It's about to be good. So, Hercules, it's a miracle, it's a miracle. We've educated these children. Don't you like the narrative? Sounds good, doesn't it? We love a good story. Cinderella gets a prince. Batman beats the Joker. The coyote catches the roadrunner. So why not? Broken school system miraculously reformed. Here's the story from the Las Vegas Review-Journal. The last full school year before the storm, a mere 56% of the students in New Orleans graduated from high school, 10 points below the national average. And the majority of those who graduated tested below average in core subjects such as reading and math. The school district was far more concerned with helping grown-ups. In 2003, the school system issued checks to 4,000 people who weren't supposed to get them and provided health benefits to 2,000 people who weren't eligible for them. And that was all Larry Carter's fault. Post-Katrina, the school board had no choice but to hand over 4/5 of the city's public school system to a new all-charter recovery school district. Fast forward 10 years later, and all things are much different, much better for students in New Orleans. At the beginning of 2013 school year, y'all remember that year, 2013 school year, 76.5% of New Orleans students were graduating on time. Not only was this figure equal to the national average, but the city's black students were graduating at a rate 16.5 percentage points higher than their counterparts nationwide. According to a 2012 study by Tulane's Collins Institute, ACT scores, listen to this, ATC scores, CT scores among the city's students had increased 1.2 points. The college entry rate among New Orleans public school students had gone up by 14 percentage points. Y'all, I'm getting my MBA, and so I know this whole statistics thing now. I just love this stuff. I love how you can do this. So what really happened? The takeover. At the end of 2004, 2005, let me tell you what it looked like, right? This is what we look like. 88 of the more than 120 public schools in New Orleans had met or exceeded the state's requirement for adequate yearly progress. We met the standard. The schools weren't failing. 93 of the schools showed academic growth. 93. Orleans Parish School Board was making documented progress in raising failing school scores in accordance with No Child Left Behind. That's that national thing, No Child Left Behind. Thus, as of 2005-2006 school year, we were working toward our success. But then we had the prayer warriors and the politics. And that was the top of the agenda at the Orleans Parish School Board meeting on September 15th. And some of us drove in, no shoes, whatever, but we got there to that school board meeting in Baton Rouge. And everybody was praying for the people who were lost. And then politics came. The superintendent of education tried, unsuccessfully, to have a New York financial consultant replace the acting superintendent of the New Orleans Public Schools. I represented her. It was crazy. A week later, the local school board president wrote an SOS line saying even after the meeting was over, Cecil Picard persisted with the issue, telling me he had already spoken with the governor and they were going to initiate takeover. That was the 15th. That was 17 days. We weren't even dry. So it was the perfect storm. The state superintendent was determined to prove his point. The plan called in was to take away our schools. He stated he didn't want to open any school in New Orleans unless it was chartered, and got the governor to sign an executive order a month later on October 15th. So almost any business, public, for-profit, not-for-profit, had a school, went to school, looked at a school, you could open a school. How'd they do it? Well, it's easy. You just declare the entire district failing, right? It was all in academic prices. So on November 5th, that's what they did, Act 35. And this afternoon, you will get a lot of details on what Act 35 did. So, this was the takeover of New Orleans public schools, and with no buildings, no students, no money, there was no district. Yeah. Tell them what you got, Johnny. You got a new system. Here are the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. The NAEP 8th grade reading and math scores in 2003, we were 47th in the nation. 2013, guess what? Still 47th in the nation. Math scores, 2003, reading scores, 2003, we were 46th in the nation. 2013, 47th in the nation. ACT, 2004, Louisiana Composite ACT scored 19.8, 48th in the nation. And thank God for Mississippi. In 2015, Louisiana is still 48th in the nation, but guess what? Our score is now 19.2. You say that's Louisiana, not New Orleans? Okay. Recovery School District graduation rate is last in the state. It's the dropout, push-out factory. It says it has a no excuses policy and will prep our kids for college. Really? In 2013, 79% of the RSD charter schools received a D or F as a state school performance grade. Only 5.5% of students who actually take AP courses score high enough on tests to get credit. Why the heck you put child in school when you in an AP class like that, right? And that ACT composite index for RSD, well, in 2013, it was 16.3. Last year, 2014, 15.7. So, okay, the experiment failed, right? No. See, I was raised by a scientist, and when Governor Kathleen Blanco indicated there would be this great experiment in New Orleans public schools, I told my dad this experiment would fail, and I listed all the reasons: no teachers, no public input, disaster capitalism. My father's a medical microbiologist, and so here he says, "You know better. Experiments can't fail, daughter. You're either testing a hypothesis or you're demonstrating a known fact." I'm a trial lawyer. I was like, whatever. Regardless, he tells me, even if it's unexpected, it's not a failure. And he was correct. What happened with New Orleans public education is not a failed experiment. These jokers demonstrated a known fact: if you permanently exile 100,000 African Americans from a city and inject a corporate agenda of white political power and economic dominance, tell them what you got, Johnny. Well, you got a shift of the balance of power, black to white. See, the promise of public education in New Orleans, had always been that the Orleans Parish School Board was this tremendous tool that built a powerful black community through jobs. That was our promise. New Orleans public schools didn't exist solely to train people to get jobs. They existed to train citizenry and to create black leadership. Straight talk. Education and reform in Louisiana had little to do with educating those 90% black children. See, if there was real concern about educating those children, we would have cleaned and reopened public housing and the FEMA hotels and allowed families to return. If education reform was really about educating these black children, we would have listened to UTNO President Brenda Mitchell, who pleaded that all attention is on the resumption of instruction immediately after Katrina. Educating black children was not the government's priority. Instead, what Katrina gave way to was this plan to transform the political power in the city of New Orleans and ensuring generational wealth would remain predominantly in the hands of our city's white community. The Orleans Parish School Board was one of the largest employers in the city of New Orleans. When I served as general counsel in 2001, its budget was $750 million and controlled by African Americans who had voting majority on the school board. The board members were extremely powerful political figures and played significant role in local and state politics. In some respects, even more powerful was the United Teachers of New Orleans. Under famed leaders Nat LaCour and then Brenda Mitchell, UTNO's membership could sway elections and therefore the balance of power statewide. So when Brenda likened the reopening of schools, I'll never forget this, with the return of a population that will galvanize a citywide recovery process. She was so sweet. There were no accolades, just fear. If Kathleen Blanco had allowed those students to return, the Orleans Parish School Board, black folk, would have regained a political foothold, now with $1.8 billion recovery dollars to distribute to black folk. You think they're going crazy over that Iranian deal? Shh. Hell no. I'm about to let that happen in New Orleans. It was about a racial makeover, better, stronger, whiter. The charter schools in New Orleans are still predominantly black attended, but governance has changed. Black veteran teachers and administrators had served in the system for decades, no longer. We suffered through this shift, and almost all white leadership recruited to the city to run charter schools. Inexperienced, teach for a graduate degree teachers who get to leave 2 to 3 years debt-free with loads of beer drinking stories about their time with the natives. This has been a large part of the racial makeover of New Orleans as a whole. The city's gentrification began in earnest with the schools. You fired the teachers, you bring in new ones, younger, from outside the city. They saw very little value in our culture and almost no respect for our community's integrity. And that's the truth. So let me close with the struggle forward. Nothing about us without us is for us. We can't let this happen again anytime, anywhere. We just can't. Even if you talk to black folk in New Orleans who were down for the change, the issue still is this was done to us without us. And that feeling is deep. It was not just about schools, it was about the destruction of a community and a culture. Public housing was destroyed and very little affordable housing built in its place. The public hospital was closed, and it was the same agenda. It was about remaking a city. And in the struggles forward, we have to dissect and understand what happened in New Orleans. Don't call it a failure. These folks knew exactly what they were doing. Only time President Bush can say honestly, mission accomplished. We got to learn from this, and we got to organize around this. So I like this quote from Howard Fuller. When black people came out of slavery, we came out with a clear understanding of the connection between education and liberation. Two groups of white people descended upon us, the missionaries and the industrialists. They both had their view of what type of education we needed to make our newborn freedom realized. During this period, there's an analogy. I've said this to all my KIP friends and TFA friends. During this period, two groups of white people descended on us, and the industrialists and the missionaries. And each one of them have their own view of what kind of education we need. He's right, and I close here. The promise of public education must be the promise of engagement, or there can be no promise of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracie.